Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So my name is Thomas Landrain. I used to be a researcher in academia in synthetic biology. Now I'm an entrepreneur. And I've been especially involved in creating open laboratories and exploring what it means to do research and innovation outside academia. And today, we're going to talk about what it means to do open research, especially in non-academic settings. What does it mean to do innovation, especially where nowadays there are so many problems to solve that we cannot just rely on traditional processes. And we need to come together even more, not only as enterprise, but also as communities. And here is Mélanie.
Hello, thank you, Thomas. So I'm Mélanie Marcel, the founder of SoScience, which is a company that is specialized in responsible research and innovation. And as Thomas just said, we are extremely interested in how can science, technology, and innovation solve some of our biggest challenges, be it social or environmental today, and how can we change the innovation system, be it open or not, in order to have everyone come on board. One actor alone today cannot solve these kind of challenges. And as was said in the previous roundtable, it's not only about NGOs, it's not only about companies, it's not only about scientists, it's all together that we need to solve them. So how are we going to do that? And is open science an answer to this question?
Right, it sounds very promising and promising, right? Open knowledge, we share everything, we can just pick what others have been thinking about, and we can just reproduce. It's been going on for years now in the software industry, and more in the hardware industry too. What about biotech? So biotech has these very specificities that it's complex, it's hard to innovate, it takes time. And usually, the fact that we don't see that much open source innovation in biotech is just a synonym of this complexity. Why? Usually, open source is very well associated with fast prototyping. The fact that you can, you're going faster than the cycle of IP, of creating IP. You don't need actually to create patents. The fact that the time you take to create patents sometimes is so long that if your concurrent or just other people have the ability to prototype better solutions faster than you have the time to produce a patent, then the patent is useless. So that doesn't happen yet in biotech or very much. That's why, however, you see it very much in software, in hardware. So the point is to explore also what has been done today in the biotech world or in the deep technologies world with open source. So maybe, Mélanie, you have a few examples.
Yeah, I think something that is interesting in what you just said is that there might be a very strong difference between what has been done in hardware and in software. And when we're talking about deep science, when we're talking about hardware, as you said, it can be very long, it can be very difficult. And actually, the question of how do you give access is really important and really interesting. One example that I like to use is actually if you imagine a project that was realized in order to 3D print limbs for people, for example, or prosthetics for people who lost their limbs. And you decide to do it open. So if you decide to put the plans of the prosthetic online, you do that in English, you open everything, and you say to everyone, you can do this 3D printing. It sounds like a very good project. However, how do you reach out to the beneficiaries? Imagine that the people needing it do not speak English. If they do not know that the project exists, if they don't have a 3D printer, if they don't know how to make a 3D printer. So you have a lot of barriers when you do open projects. In order to really think about impact, you have to think about accessibility of the solution. And so in this particular case, it might be there is no one answer. It might be easier to do it open or not, but you have to think in your particular situation, is it a better way of doing it, and is it reaching really the beneficiaries, and is it really having an impact? And I think we mentioned when we talked about it, the fact that maybe you could talk about Pili, and how you had this shift maybe from open, or why open would work or would not work, and what was the story about it?
So, yeah, absolutely. So, about 10 years ago, I created the first biohacker space in Europe, here in Paris. What's a biohacker space? Is basically a biotech lab, but in a squat. Where everything is open. It's just the idea that how can we use biology outside professional settings? Basically, a bit like how makers would use 3D printers, but here it's biotech. And one of the projects there was how can we use biotech to replace petrochemistry. Especially, we were very interested in how to replace inks or dyes in pigments, where most of them comes from petrochemistry. Just for a bit of context, 1 kilogram of dye you need for 1 kilogram of dye 100 liters of petrol. So it's by far one of the most polluting industry in the world, just for coloring your clothes, for example. So, however, biotech has this ability to transform basic components like sugar into any kind of molecules. So we thought, can we actually do that? Can we produce dyes? And we did a proof of concept there in this squat in Vitry-sur-Seine, and it was in an open framework. It was really open, and we thought that we could, even develop this technology using open source. However, there was something we didn't understand at the time. As I was telling just before, open source really matters when the technology is less important than the service. Meaning that your ability to iterate on the technology is very important. Here, it was not the case. The complexity was super high. We were like cutting edge. So we will need years of R&D to really make this technology mature. And so in that case, with Pili, the company that was created based on that proof of concept, we decided we could not go into the open source realm. So we decided to create patents and go for the industrial path. And that is a successful one for us, as we've been there for 5 years, and we still have at least 4 years of R&D yet, to be able to produce something at scale for the industry. So that's, I think it's an interesting example. However, when you have technologies that are already mature, where it's been there for decades sometimes. 3D printers are exactly this example. Is the patents expired a few years ago. That's why we had this boom, right? So it was not a cutting edge technology anymore. So people could just reclaim it and explore what it means at lower scale, not for industrial demands, but just for personal demands, for example. So new business models were born out of this. And somehow it's a bit the same right now with biotech and the pharma industry also. We're seeing technologies like, for example, the sonograph. So, for example, if you want to do an echography, the technology inside are kind of, I would not say simple, but they've been there for quite some time. So there are projects that are trying to produce open source echographic machine. And so that's important, because at the end, what this will enable is to decrease the price of the technology, as it has been done for 3D printers. And then what will happen is, because the technology matters less now, the business model will be built around the services. Basically, how we can use those technology as a community, as a network of people, and how information can navigate, especially using digital technologies.
Are you mentioning Ecopen?
Yes, the project Ecopen, absolutely.
It's a really great project. You should link it up. And as we're talking about, you mentioned La Paillasse that you founded. Can I ask you here, the audience, how many of you have heard of open hack lab or biospaces where you can actually go and do your own experiments? How many of you have already heard about that? Yeah. Not that much. So another question, even harder. How many of you have you used one? All right. So that's quite interesting. And
it's quite this kind of model of open laboratories are very new, and they are not so numerous. Fab Labs, however, I'm sure if we ask the questions, like who have heard of Fab Labs here, right?
The brand is working.
Yeah. So Fab Labs have been there for more longer, but they're also more numerous, and their model is quite installed. Also, and so, however, this is based on those fast prototyping technologies like 3D printers, and that's why it's cheap. Biotech laboratories doesn't have yet these kind of technologies, even though it's coming. And one of the most important example in the last few years is gene editing, and also gene sequencing. The fact that the first human genome the cost of sequencing the first human genome back about 20 years ago was about $3 billion. It took about 20 years. Now, if you want to sequence one whole human genome, it costs less than a couple of hundred of euros, right? It takes almost a few hours only. So there is a massive difference. And it's not only about the cost, it's about the simplicity. Now you have DNA sequencers that are the size of a USB stick rack. You can just plug it on your iPhone and you can go around in nature and sequence whatever you want. So it's a mind-blowing transformation, which is not anymore about technology, but about access and what it means to have access to those technologies and what you want to do with it.
Yes, and I'd like to go back on this idea about access and costs and price and collaboration, because not everyone can have access, of course, to these technologies. And it's really also difficult to have access to scientists and to laboratories. And as we can see here, not so many people are actually using these kind of places where you have this access. And what is interesting, I think, in sustainable brands in general is that we are talking to mainly major companies. And so how today major companies are working and collaborating with others. I'd like to give one example of what we are doing at SoScience. We create these programs that we call the Future Of, and on one specific team, we will address one question, one challenge that is a problem that is both technical, but also a social or environmental challenge. For example, the last one we did was with the agro-business Diana Food, and it was named The Future of Waste. And we addressed the question, how can we valorize industrial waste of fruits and vegetables in order to have positive impacts on health and nutrition. And here, the idea is really, in collaboration with this company, to actually select a group of people that usually do not work together and usually do not collaborate together. So NGOs, scientists, other companies, even people from the business supporters, so investors, for example. And you have this group of 30 to 50 people that would have never met if they did not try to solve this huge challenge that is a social one, but that is also a technical one. And they meet and they realize that they have a lot to do together, and they try to create these new kind of projects and to really do open innovation and open collaboration. And I think this idea of collaboration is key for companies today. You have to reach out externally to find the expertise, both scientists, but also social and environmental and challenges expertise. And this idea of massive collaboration, I think is very also something you have in your new project.
But can I ask a question from the floor, please? Interrupt there, Mélanie and Thomas. We know that one of the main challenges with open science is how to reward. In fact, what's going on and what rewards can be built into this system to promote more open sciences practice?
Yeah, so open science is an approach that really matters for projects that are neither in deep, cutting-edge startups or are in very big academic laboratories that are very well funded. Basically, it's in between those two worlds, you have a huge amount of issues, problems that are targeted by any kind of organizations, but that don't have sometimes the right network of contributors, of expertise, doesn't have the right resources. And it's not because they're not important. They are. It's just that the world, the way it is made, it's hard actually to connect, you know. And if we want to see more open science and open development in general, it means that we need to have more contributors. So at the end, it's what are the incentives to make to have more open science in general. The last initiative I'm working on is especially about the incentivizations here. It's called Just One Giant Lab, and the idea is, at the end, we don't lack resources, we don't lack people, we don't lack ideas, we don't lack problems. And at the end, it's all about connecting those dots together. And how do we make sure that at the end, an NGO or a scientific laboratory that have like a great problem they're working on, but they lack the right expertise people. However, on the other side, you have a lot of people that are either working in companies, working in universities, or as just students. But they want to reach out, they want to be able to work with their own experience on other kind of problems, either pro bono or just because they are looking for experiences. We think that that kind of motivation is already enough to breach a barrier if we're able to connect those two together. And then it's all about how do we make sure that the work of everyone is valorized. So at the end, I think what's really important here is we have so many problems we need to solve. We are 7 billion people on this planet, and about only like a billion of us have had access to higher education. However, there are only about 6-7 million researchers in this world. So the gap is huge, means that there is only about a person over 1,000 that are contributing to science or innovation, or like open innovation. So we can go further. And so that's why we need more collaboration. We need to invite others. We need to open the processes of research and basically to build those common bricks together so that we can, solve better problems and share those solutions better.
Yeah, and I see it's the end of our time, and we're talking a lot about collaboration. I think we should collaborate more together, actually. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Mélanie. And in fact, that's what Sustainable Brands Paris is all about. It's about coming together, finding new people, and finding new ways to collaborate together. Thank you.